it was refreshing. And then everybody started talking about it, and we went back and looked at a couple more films, and then
No anger, no raised voice. Just Clint Eastwood putting down the man who would eventually win an Oscar, and then walking away. That moment tells you everything about who Clint Eastwood really is. Not the squinting cowboy, not the calm patriarch Hollywood made him into. Something colder, more exacting, and far less forgiving than anyone ever admitted out loud. At 95, the legend of silence finally speaks, and what it says will change the way you see 6 of the biggest names in the history of the movies. Who did he freeze out? And why? What does it take to get permanently deleted from Clint Eastwood's world? And does a man who built his entire code around discipline, honor, and silence have any right to forgive at all? 6 people found out what that erasure felt like. 6 people who stood beside him in the bright light of Hollywood and, in his eyes, chose wrong. Leonardo DiCaprio was supposed to be a dream. When production began on J. Edgar in 2010, Hollywood held its breath. The coolest director alive, paired with the most ferociously prepared actor of his generation. What could go wrong? Everything. Quietly, DiCaprio arrived on set carrying folders, FBI memos, historical timelines, margins full of notes scrawled in the margins of other notes. He wasn't just playing J. Edgar Hoover. He was becoming him, one annotated document at a time, and Clint, who had built his entire filmmaking philosophy on instinct, on the electricity of the unrepeatable first take, watched this and said nothing. Not to DiCaprio, not to anyone. He just watched. Then came the scene that broke the silence. An emotional breakdown, the kind that requires an actor to excavate something genuine and then put it back, bruised, in front of a camera. DiCaprio did it in one take, raw, real, flawless. The crew did breathe. Clint murmured, "Perfect, cut," which from him was the equivalent of a standing ovation. Leo wanted another take and another. By the 6th, Clint was no longer behind the camera. He stood at the craft table, coffee in hand, stone-faced and somewhere far away. An assistant asked if he was all right. He muttered, "He's still searching for something I already found," and said nothing else for the rest of the afternoon. DiCaprio won his Oscar years later. The call from Eastwood never came. Because for Clint, perfection is not a destination you labor toward through repetition. It is a moment of truth you either catch or you miss. And once it passes, chasing it is not dedication, it's insecurity. Some feuds begin with a single word said in the wrong room. The war between Clint Eastwood and Michael Moore began with a tweet. But it was really the final chapter of a contempt that had been building for nearly 2 decades. In 2005, Eastwood stood at a podium at the National Board of Review Awards and with the whole room watching said flatly, "If Michael Moore ever shows up at my door with a camera, I'll kill him." The room laughed, nervous. Eastwood stared straight ahead and walked off. That was not a joke. That was a deposition. Clint did not despise Moore because of politics, exactly. He despised what Moore represented. Spectacle dressed up as principle, noise performing as courage. To Eastwood, soldiers are not symbols in a director's argument. They are people. Real people who made a specific, irreversible choice that most people never have to make. When Moore compared American Sniper to Nazi propaganda in 2015, then called it a joke, when the backlash arrived, Clint didn't erupt. He went quiet in a different way. The way a door locks. He doesn't forget insults. A longtime collaborator said simply, "He deletes them." Moore's name has not existed in Eastwood's orbit since. In Clint's world, you can disagree with a man. You can argue with him, compete with him, even dislike him. But the moment you spit on the thing he considers sacred, the conversation is permanently over. If Leonardo DiCaprio frustrated Clint with too many takes, and Moore enraged him with reckless words, then Barbra Streisand got under his skin in a way neither of them managed. Because with Streisand, It was personal. It was philosophical. It was everything Eastwood believed was killing the art he loved, walking around in a famous woman's shoes and calling itself perfectionism. Their rivalry began in the early 1980s, when both were pivoting from acting to directing. Streisand was known for demanding dozens of takes. Sometimes 50, sometimes 60, hunting for one precise expression she hadn't been able to describe in words. Clint's rule was simpler: 2 takes maximum. If it was real the first time, it was worth manufacturing. 2 entirely different definitions of truth, and neither was willing to borrow from the other. By 1992, the contempt had gone public. When Streisand was passed over for a Best Director nomination for The Prince of Tides, Eastwood was overheard telling someone, maybe if she made decisions faster, she'd have finished more than 3 films in 15 years. That line traveled through the industry in hours. Then came the project that sealed everything. Streisand had been attached to direct the bridges of Madison County for years. And for years, she hesitated, revised, reconsidered. Clint stepped in, took the wheel, and delivered in the quiet, controlled, devastatingly emotional way that only someone who trusts instinct can. Meryl Streep received an Oscar nomination. Streisand watched from a distance. He'd had taken her film. He'd had made it without her. And he'd had done it without saying her name once. Tommy Lee Jones was different. With the others, Clint's contempt was quiet with Jones. It was a staring contest between 2 men who had both spent careers refusing to blink. Their collision came not on an Eastwood-directed film, but on the 1993 thriller In the Line of Fire, where both men shared scenes as equals. From the first day, the temperature on set was wrong. Jones didn't take direction quietly. He improvised, argued, rewrote his lines between takes, and, most infuriatingly, stayed fully in character long after the director had called cut, continuing to perform for an audience of stagehands and lighting technicians. Clint ran his sets with the clean efficiency of a man who believes stillness is a form of respect. He watched Jones bark and prowl and push and burn through energy that, in his view, belonged to the take, not to the space between takes. During one confrontation, scenes went so deep into the moment that when Clint called cut, he kept going. Eyes locked on Eastwood, raw and unbroken. The crew froze, unsure whose theater this was. After a long, unbending pause, Clint leaned to his assistant and whispered, "Life's too short for that kind of theater." Then he walked off set. Jones is a great actor. Everyone knows it. Clint knows it. But greatness, in Eastwood's code, is not a free pass. There is room for one alpha on a set, and the alpha is the one who calls cut, not the one who ignores it. Richard Burton cost Clint something harder to replace than time. He cost him respect. On the Austrian locations of Where Eagles Dare in 1968, Burton arrived late, slurred his lines, and occasionally arrived in the morning still carrying the previous night. Clint was already in costume at dawn, standing in the cold, waiting. He didn't lecture Burton. He didn't pull him aside. He simply watched, and crew members said you could see the esteem leaving his face in real time, the way heat leaves a room when someone leaves a window open. Burton was deep inside a volcanic marriage with Elizabeth Taylor, and every night seemed to end at the bottom of something. Every morning, the production paid. After Burton fumbled the same line for the 10th consecutive time, Clint muttered, without looking at him, "I am getting paid by the picture, not by the hour." The crew laughed. Burton didn't. The final unforgivable act came when Burton was overheard describing the film as a paycheck job. To Eastwood, a man who believed, genuinely and completely, every frame of every film deserves your entire self. That was not cynicism. It was vandalism. You don't get to take a man's work seriously and then announce publicly you never did. Years later, asked about Burton, Clint answered in 4 words, "Talented guy, wasted talent, eulogy and indictment in the same breath. That was his generosity. That was also his limit. Of the six, Jean Seberg is the one Clint has never spoken of in any interview. Not once. And that silence is the loudest sound in the whole story. They were cast together in the 1969 musical Paint Your Wagon, and from the beginning they were operating in different realities. Seberg was fragile, unpredictable, politically surveilled by the FBI, and carrying the kind of psychic weight that makes simple things, like showing up, like staying in a scene, feel impossible. Clint was punctual, focused, and constitutionally allergic to drama that lived off-screen. By the third week, she would stop mid-scene to ask about her motivation. A script supervisor remembered it clearly. Clint would stare at the floor, waiting, and you could watch something close off behind his eyes. He wasn't angry. He was done. And he was too professional to say it out loud. When the film failed, Seberg told reporters that Clint's wooden performance had dragged it down. That to him was the real betrayal. Not the chaos on set. Not the delays. The public knife in the back. After he had spent months quietly holding a production together that had no right to survive. He never said her name again. Not in press, not on panels, not in the long authorized interviews he gave in later years. When Seberg died tragically in 1979, friends say Clint looked genuinely, privately sad. But there was no statement, no tribute, no softening, just a man honoring the boundary he had drawn, even across a grave. "Some people aren't cut out for the work," he said once quietly to no one in particular, "and I don't need to deal with it twice." 6 names, 6 silences, 6 permanent deletions from the world of a man who believed, above everything, that the work deserved your whole truth, not your hesitation, not your ego, not your self-destruction, and certainly not your public betrayal. Was Clint Eastwood right? Maybe the more honest question is this: how many of us have drawn our own invisible lines? People we cut off, conversations we ended, doors we closed and never reopened, and called it standards when it might have just been pride, wearing a more dignified coat. The hardest thing about Clint Eastwood is not the coldness. It's that you understand it completely.